I'm Rachel Thompson, 32 years old, and I'll never forget the moment my sister Morgan looked directly at our unconscious father in his hospital bed and told our mother, "Don't worry about the medical bills. Just let Rachel pay for everything like she always does." What Morgan didn't know was that I had been secretly paying for our entire family's premium health insurance for the past 6 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When she smirked at me across that sterile hospital room, thinking she was putting me in my place, I realized it was time to show her exactly how much power I actually held over all their lives. The heart monitor's steady beeping filled the silence as I pulled out my phone and opened the insurance portal app. Morgan's confident expression began to crack when she saw me typing, but she had no idea I was about to cancel the very policy that was covering Dad's emergency surgery at that exact moment. That night at St. Mary's General Hospital changed everything between us forever, and Morgan learned the hard way that you should never bite the hand that literally keeps your family's medical coverage active. Growing up in Scottsdale, Arizona, Morgan and I lived what most people would consider a normal middle-class life. Our parents, David and Linda Thompson, worked steady jobs. Dad as a mechanic at a local auto shop, and Mom as a receptionist at a dental office. From the outside, we probably looked like any other suburban family with 2 daughters 4 years apart. But inside our house, the dynamic was crystal clear from the time I could walk and talk. I was the responsible one, the planner, the daughter, who could be counted on for anything. When I was 7 years old, I was already setting my own alarm clock and making sure I had my backpack ready for school the night before. Meanwhile, 3-year-old Morgan was the baby who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She was adorable, charming, and had mastered the art of getting attention through tears or tantrums whenever she wanted something. The pattern established itself early and never changed. When Morgan forgot her lunch money, Mom would drive across town to bring it to her at school. When I forgot something, which was rare, I was told it was a good learning experience about responsibility. When Morgan's room was messy, it was because she was creative and artistic. When my room had even one item out of place, I heard lectures about setting a good example as the older sister. By middle school, the favoritism had become so obvious that even my friends noticed it. Sarah, my best friend since elementary school, used to ask why my parents seemed to treat Morgan like she was made of glass while expecting me to handle everything on my own. I didn't have a good answer then, and honestly, I still don't have one now. Some families just fall into these patterns, and ours was deeply entrenched in treating Morgan like precious cargo, while viewing me as the reliable workhorse. High school brought new challenges. As Morgan discovered, she could manipulate situations to her advantage. When we both wanted to use the car on the same night, somehow Morgan's plans always took priority because hers were more important or time-sensitive. When there was money for only one of us to participate in an extracurricular activity, Morgan's interests somehow always won out because she needed more social development while I was naturally self-sufficient. The most infuriating part was how our parents would praise Morgan for the smallest accomplishments while taking my achievements for granted. When Morgan passed her driving test on the 3rd try, there was a celebration dinner at her favorite restaurant. When I got accepted to Arizona State University with a partial academic scholarship, the response was more like, "Well, of course you did, Rachel. You've always been smart." The message was clear. Morgan's successes were special and unexpected, while mine were simply what was expected from the responsible daughter. During my senior year of high school, I started working part-time at a local insurance office, filing paperwork and answering phones after school. I was fascinated by the complexity of insurance policies and how they worked to protect people during their most vulnerable moments. The office manager, Mrs. Patterson, took me under her wing and began teaching me about different types of coverage, risk assessment, and the business side of insurance. She told me I had a natural aptitude for understanding the industry and encouraged me to consider it as a career path. Meanwhile, Morgan was busy being Morgan. She joined the drama club, which our parents thought was wonderful for her, creative expression. She started dating different boys every few months, each relationship ending in some kind of dramatic scene that required family intervention and support. She struggled with math and science, but excelled in art and English, which our parents celebrated as evidence of her right brain thinking. Every report card was an opportunity to praise her strengths, while glossing over her weaknesses. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class, earning a full academic scholarship to ASU and acceptance into their highly competitive business program. The graduation party Mom planned for me was nice, but it felt more like a family obligation than a celebration. 2 years later, when Morgan barely graduated with a C average, her graduation party was elaborate and emotional, with relatives flying in from out of state to celebrate her overcoming challenges and finding her way. College was my escape from the family dynamic, at least temporarily. At ASU, I thrived in my business and finance courses, particularly those related to insurance and risk management. I maintained a near-perfect GPA while working part-time at State Farm, gaining hands-on experience in claims processing and customer service. I loved the analytical aspect of insurance, assessing risk, calculating premiums, and helping people protect what mattered most to them. Morgan, on the other hand, started college with grand plans that changed every semester. First, she was going to be a theater major, then switched to art, then to psychology, then to communications. Each change came with dramatic explanations about, quote, finding her true calling, and requests for emotional support from the family. Our parents were endlessly patient with her exploration, calling it normal college experimentation, while they had expected me to know exactly what I wanted from day one. By my junior year, I had secured an internship at Phoenix Premium Insurance, one of the largest insurance companies in Arizona. The internship was competitive and paid well, allowing me to cover my living expenses without asking our parents for money. I was proud of my independence and the fact that I was building a career in an industry I genuinely enjoyed. The complex world of insurance policies, regulations, and risk assessment felt like solving puzzles every day. Morgan's college experience was more chaotic. She changed majors 3 more times, had several relationships that ended badly, and seemed to constantly need money for textbooks, art supplies, or emergency situations. Our parents would stress about how to help her financially, often sacrificing their own needs to ensure Morgan had what she needed. They never asked me for help during this time, but I could see the strain on their faces during family dinners. After graduation, I was offered a full-time position at Phoenix Premium Insurance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As an underwriter, the job came with excellent benefits, including comprehensive health insurance that covered not just me, but allowed me to add family members to my policy at a significant discount. I was making good money for a recent college graduate and felt proud of what I had accomplished through my own hard work and determination. Morgan graduated a year later with a degree in communications and immediately moved back home while she, quote, figured out her next steps. She worked part-time at various retail jobs, none of which lasted more than a few months. She had dreams of working in social media marketing or maybe starting her own business, but nothing seemed to stick. Our parents welcomed her back with open arms, making no demands about rent or timelines for moving out. During this time, I began to notice that our parents were struggling more than they let on. Dad's auto shop was losing business to larger chain operations, and Mom's dental office had cut her hours due to economic pressures. They were trying to maintain their same lifestyle while dealing with reduced income, and the stress was beginning to show. Their health insurance through Dad's work was expensive and had high deductibles that made routine medical care a financial burden. That's when I made a decision that would define our family's dynamic for years to come. Using my employee benefits at Phoenix Premium Insurance, I quietly added my parents to my comprehensive health policy. The family plan cost me an extra $300 per month, but it gave them access to top-tier medical care, with low co-pays and virtually no deductible. I told them they had qualified for a special program through Dad's work, and they were so relieved to have better coverage that they didn't ask too many questions about the details. 6 months later, when Morgan was still living at home and working sporadically, I made another decision that I would later question many times. I added her to the family policy as well. Morgan was 24 and still technically a dependent, so it was allowed under the insurance rules. The cost went up another $150 per month, but I justified it by telling myself it was temporary until she got established in her career. What I didn't anticipate was how this act of generosity would become a source of resentment and manipulation. Morgan began treating the excellent health insurance as just another thing she was entitled to, never questioning how our family had suddenly gained access to such comprehensive coverage. She used it freely for routine checkups, dental work, and even cosmetic procedures that were partially covered under our plan's wellness benefits. Meanwhile, our parents' gratitude for their improved healthcare situation gradually faded into acceptance, as if this blessing had simply fallen from the sky. They never asked detailed questions about the coverage or how long it would last. In their minds, it was just one less thing to worry about, and they were content to leave the details mysterious. For 3 years, this arrangement continued without major incident. I was building my career, steadily moving up at Phoenix Premium Insurance, from underwriter to senior underwriter to team lead. My salary increased with each promotion, making the insurance premiums easier to manage, though they still represented a significant monthly expense that none of my family members knew I was covering. Morgan, meanwhile, continued to drift through various jobs and relationships, always seeming to land on her feet thanks to family support and what she assumed was just good luck with healthcare coverage. She dated a series of guys who never seemed to stick around long, worked at companies that never seemed to appreciate her talents, and maintained a lifestyle that didn't quite match her actual income level. The dynamic that had been established in childhood had simply evolved into adult patterns. I was still the responsible one, the problem solver, the daughter who handled things quietly behind the scenes. Morgan was still the one who needed support, deserved special consideration, and somehow expected that things would work out in her favor without understanding the mechanisms that made it possible. Looking back now, I can see that I was enabling the same patterns that had frustrated me throughout our childhood. By secretly providing this crucial support, I was allowing Morgan and our parents to maintain their assumptions about family roles, without forcing anyone to confront the reality of our situation. I was the invisible hand that kept everything running smoothly, and my resentment was building with each premium payment that went unacknowledged and unappreciated. But I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. Family takes care of family, and I was in a position to help without causing anyone stress or embarrassment. I told myself it was temporary, that eventually Morgan would get established and our parents would find better insurance options through Dad's work or retirement planning. The arrangement felt sustainable, even if it felt unbalanced. What I couldn't have predicted was how dramatically everything would change on one October evening when Dad collapsed in their kitchen while helping Mom prepare dinner. The heart attack was sudden and severe, requiring immediate emergency surgery and an extended stay in the intensive care unit at St. Mary's General Hospital. In that moment of family crisis, all the hidden dynamics and secret arrangements I had maintained for years were about to explode into the open in ways I never could have imagined. The ambulance sirens wailed through the quiet Scottsdale neighborhood as paramedics wheeled Dad toward the emergency vehicle on that Tuesday evening in October. Mom rode with him to St. Mary's General Hospital, while Morgan and I followed in separate cars, both of us trying to process what had just happened. Dad had been laughing at something on television one moment, then clutching his chest and collapsing to the kitchen floor the next. At the hospital, as we sat in the sterile waiting room while Dad underwent emergency cardiac surgery, I watched Morgan pace back and forth, her face a mixture of genuine concern and something else I couldn't quite identify. She kept checking her phone, presumably updating her friends and maybe her current boyfriend about the family crisis. Every few minutes, she would sit down next to Mom and offer comfort, playing the role of the devoted younger daughter perfectly. What struck me most was how naturally Morgan assumed that all the medical care, all the specialists, all the advanced procedures Dad might need, would simply be available to our family. She never questioned whether we could afford the cardiac catheterization, the potential bypass surgery, or the extended hospital stay that might be required. In her mind, healthcare was just something that happened when you needed it, like calling the fire department or the police. I knew better. I knew exactly what Dad's emergency surgery would cost without insurance, and I knew precisely what our family's financial situation would be if they had to rely on Dad's basic work policy with its massive deductibles and limited coverage. But Morgan had no idea that the comprehensive insurance card Mom handed to the registration clerk was connected to my employee benefits at Phoenix Premium Insurance. She had no idea that I had been paying over $400 every month for years to ensure our family had access to the best medical care available. As the hours stretched on and we waited for updates from the surgical team, Morgan's behavior began to reveal her true character in ways that surprised even me. When the financial counselor approached our family to discuss payment arrangements and insurance verification, Morgan actually rolled her eyes and gestured toward me. "Rachel handles all the money stuff in our family," she said dismissively. "She's the one with the fancy insurance job, so she can figure out how to pay for everything." The financial counselor looked confused, clearly not understanding the family dynamic she had walked into. Mom was too distraught to pay attention to the conversation, focused entirely on Dad's condition and the wait for news from the doctors. I found myself in the strange position of managing both the emotional crisis and the administrative details, while Morgan seemed to view her role as providing moral support and social media updates about our family's tragedy. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged from surgery at nearly midnight to tell us that Dad's procedure had been successful, but that he would need several days in intensive care, followed by extensive cardiac rehabilitation, Morgan's first question wasn't about Dad's recovery timeline or his long-term prognosis. Her first question was whether this would affect his ability to work and how our family would manage financially if he couldn't return to the auto shop right away. "Don't worry about any of that," I told her, exhausted from the stress of the day and irritated by her immediate focus on financial implications. "Dad's insurance will cover everything, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." Morgan looked at me with an expression I had seen many times throughout our lives, a mixture of relief and expectation that I would handle whatever problems arose. "Good," she said, settling back into her chair. "I was worried we might have to start some kind of fundraiser or ask relatives for money. Thank God Dad has good insurance through his work." I didn't correct her assumption about where the insurance coverage actually came from. At that moment, with Dad fighting for his life upstairs in the cardiac intensive care unit, it didn't seem like the right time to explain the complex web of financial support I had been providing to our family for years. But something about Morgan's casual assumption that everything would be handled, combined with her complete lack of curiosity about how or by whom, planted a seed of resentment that would grow larger over the following days. Over the next week, as Dad slowly recovered and our family maintained a constant presence at the hospital, I began to notice patterns in Morgan's behavior that I had been too close to see clearly before. She would arrive at the hospital each morning with expensive coffee drinks and pastries, never offering to bring anything for Mom or me. She would spend hours on her phone, updating her social media followers about our family crisis, and seemingly enjoying the attention and sympathy she received from friends and acquaintances. Most significantly, Morgan seemed to view the medical crisis as an opportunity to demonstrate her importance within our family dynamic. She would speak authoritatively to nurses and doctors, as if she understood Dad's condition better than anyone else. She would make decisions about visiting schedules and family updates without consulting Mom or me. She positioned herself as the primary family spokesperson, fielding calls from relatives and coordinating meal deliveries from friends and neighbors. The breaking point came during a family meeting with Dad's cardiologist about his discharge planning and follow-up care. Dr. Martinez was explaining the various medications Dad would need, the cardiac rehabilitation program he should attend, and the lifestyle changes that would be necessary for his long-term heart health. The doctor mentioned that some of the newer cardiac medications were expensive, but that our insurance plan had excellent prescription coverage that would make them affordable. Morgan nodded along with this information as if she had been involved in selecting our insurance plan or understood anything about prescription benefits. When Dr. Martinez asked if we had any questions about the financial aspects of Dad's ongoing care, Morgan actually laughed and pointed at me. "Rachel's the insurance expert in our family," she said. "She'll make sure everything gets paid for properly. That's what big sisters are for, right?" The casual way she dismissed the financial complexity of Dad's medical care, combined with her assumption that I would simply handle everything, revealed something about Morgan's character that I had been trying to ignore for years. She didn't just expect me to be responsible. She had built her entire adult life around the assumption that someone else, specifically me, would manage the difficult or expensive aspects of family obligations. What Morgan didn't know, as she made her joke about big sisters taking care of everything, was that I had been taking care of everything already. For 6 years, I had been ensuring that our family had access to the best medical care available through my employee benefits. The comprehensive insurance that was covering Dad's surgery, his medications, his rehabilitation, and all the follow-up care had been my responsibility long before his heart attack ever happened. As I sat in that sterile conference room, listening to Morgan casually assign me the role of family financial manager while she maintained her position as the beloved younger daughter who deserved care and support, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my perspective. I had been enabling this dynamic for so long that everyone, including Morgan, had come to see my invisible support as simply the natural order of things. But invisible support can become visible very quickly when the person providing it decides to step back. The comprehensive insurance policy that Morgan took for granted was actually a benefit I could modify or cancel at any time through my employer's benefits portal. The prescription coverage she assumed would handle Dad's expensive medications was something I controlled completely. The financial security she felt about our family's ability to handle medical emergencies was entirely dependent on my continued willingness to provide it. For the first time in years, I began to consider what would happen if I stopped carrying the financial responsibility for everyone else's health care. What if Morgan had to confront the reality that her casual lifestyle and sporadic work history meant she couldn't afford comprehensive medical insurance on her own? What if our parents had to face the fact that Dad's basic work policy would leave them financially devastated by a medical emergency like his heart attack? The power dynamic in our family wasn't actually what it appeared to be on the surface. Morgan might be the favored daughter who received emotional support and flexibility, but I held the financial keys to everyone's security and well-being. The question was whether I was ready to use that power to change our family's dynamic permanently, or whether I would continue to provide invisible support while watching Morgan take credit for being the caring, devoted daughter. As Dad's recovery progressed and our family began to settle into new routines around his medical needs, I found myself paying closer attention to how Morgan talked about our situation and her role in managing it. The patterns I observed would ultimately lead me to a confrontation that would change our family forever, but at that moment I was still processing the revelation that I held far more power in our relationships than anyone realized. Part 3. Engagement and building tension. The days following Dad's heart attack revealed aspects of our family dynamic that I had never fully understood before. As Dad progressed from the intensive care unit to a regular hospital room, and finally to discharge planning, I watched Morgan navigate the crisis with a combination of genuine concern and calculated self-interest that was both impressive and disturbing. Morgan had always been charismatic, but during Dad's hospitalization, she transformed our family's medical emergency into a platform for her own emotional needs. She created a group chat with extended family members, positioning herself as the primary source of updates about Dad's condition. She organized a meal train through her social media networks, coordinating food deliveries and visitor schedules, as if she were managing a major event. She even started a small fundraiser among her friends to help with family expenses, though she never consulted with Mom or me about whether we actually needed financial assistance. What struck me most was how Morgan's crisis management style centered entirely around her own emotional experience, rather than the practical realities our family was facing. She would spend hours at Dad's bedside, holding his hand and talking about how scared she had been, how much he meant to her, how this experience had made her realize what really mattered in life. These conversations seemed genuine in the moment, but I noticed that they always shifted focus away from Dad's actual needs and toward Morgan's feelings about the situation. Meanwhile, the practical aspects of managing Dad's care fell to me by default. I was the one coordinating with insurance representatives to ensure all procedures were pre-approved. I was the one researching cardiac rehabilitation programs and scheduling follow-up appointments with specialists. I was the one meeting with the hospital's financial counselors to understand billing procedures and payment timelines. Morgan seemed to assume that these administrative tasks would handle themselves, or that someone else would take care of them. The most revealing moment came when Dad was finally ready for discharge after 8 days in the hospital. The discharge planner needed to review all the follow-up care instructions, medication schedules, and insurance authorizations with our family. Mom was overwhelmed by the complexity of Dad's new medical regimen, understandably focused on the emotional aspects of bringing him home safely. Morgan was present for the meeting but spent most of it taking selfies with Dad and posting updates about his recovery progress. I found myself taking detailed notes about medication timing, dietary restrictions, warning signs to watch for, and when to call the cardiologist versus when to call emergency services. The discharge planner seemed relieved to have someone in the family who was asking practical questions and demonstrating understanding of the care requirements. But when she asked who would be the primary contact for insurance and billing questions, Morgan immediately volunteered my name and phone number. Rachel handles all our family's insurance stuff, Morgan explained to the discharge planner. She works for an insurance company, so she understands all the complicated paperwork better than the rest of us. This wasn't entirely untrue, but the casual way Morgan assigned me this responsibility, without asking whether I was willing to take it on, reflected the assumption that had governed our family relationships for years. What Morgan didn't understand was that my expertise in insurance wasn't just professional knowledge. It was intimate, personal knowledge of our family-specific coverage, because I had designed and funded it myself. When I answered detailed questions about our policy's prescription benefits, it wasn't because I had researched the information. It was because I had selected those benefits specifically to ensure our family would have access to the best possible care. The week after Dad came home from the hospital, our family settled into new routines around his recovery needs. Mom took leave from her job at the dental office to care for Dad full-time during his initial recovery period. This meant a significant reduction in family income at exactly the moment when medical expenses were highest. Dad wouldn't be able to return to physical work at the auto shop for at least 3 months, and even then, his cardiologist had recommended he consider transitioning to less physically demanding work. I expected this financial pressure to create stress and difficult conversations within our family about budgeting, lifestyle adjustments, and long-term planning. Instead, Morgan seemed completely insulated from these concerns. She continued her sporadic work schedule, picking up shifts at a local boutique when she felt like it, and declining shifts when she had other plans. She maintained her social activities, including expensive dinners with friends and weekend trips to Sedona or Flagstaff. She even mentioned casually that she was considering adopting a dog, which would add veterinary expenses to her already minimal budget. When I asked Morgan how she was managing her expenses during this challenging time for our family, she seemed genuinely confused by the question. "I'm doing fine," she said. "My health insurance is still working, and I don't have many bills since I'm living at home. Besides, I figure if things get really tight, we'll all just have to help each other out, right? That's what families do." Her response revealed so much about Morgan's understanding of our family's financial situation. She assumed that her health insurance was somehow independent of our family's economic circumstances. She believed that living at home was a favor to our parents rather than a financial necessity for her. Most significantly, she viewed potential family financial assistance as a collective responsibility rather than something that might depend on specific individuals' ability and willingness to provide support. I began to realize that Morgan's entire adult life had been built on assumptions about financial safety nets that she had never questioned or investigated. She assumed she had health insurance because most working adults have health insurance, not because someone was specifically paying for her coverage. She assumed our family could handle medical emergencies because most middle-class families managed to handle medical emergencies, not because someone had specifically arranged for comprehensive coverage that made such emergencies manageable. These assumptions weren't necessarily unreasonable from Morgan's perspective. She had grown up in a family where medical care was available when needed, where financial crises were handled behind the scenes, where the adult responsibilities of insurance and budgeting seemed to manage themselves. From her viewpoint, she was simply living the same kind of life that most people her age lived, working part-time, living with family, focusing on personal relationships and social activities, while gradually building toward greater independence. What Morgan didn't know was that her lifestyle was only possible because of invisible financial support that could disappear at any time. The health insurance that allowed her to maintain medical care while working part-time was actually a benefit I provided through my full-time employment. The financial stability that let our parents focus on Dad's recovery without panic about medical bills was actually security I had created through years of strategic insurance planning. During this period, I found myself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. On one hand, I was genuinely glad that my secret financial support was allowing our family to focus on Dad's health and recovery, rather than worrying about money. Dad was healing well, attending cardiac rehabilitation sessions, and gradually building back his strength and confidence. Mom was able to provide the care and attention he needed without the additional stress of financial pressure. Even Morgan's emotional support, however self-centered it sometimes seemed, was contributing to Dad's positive recovery environment. On the other hand, I was growing increasingly resentful of the way my invisible contributions were being taken for granted. No one in my family had any idea how much I was spending each month to maintain their healthcare security. No one understood that my career decisions were partly influenced by the need to maintain employment benefits that covered not just me, but our entire family. No one recognized that my careful budgeting and conservative lifestyle choices were partly motivated by the financial responsibility I had taken on for everyone else's well-being. The turning point in my thinking came during a family dinner at my parents' house about 3 weeks after Dad's discharge from the hospital. Dad was feeling well enough to join us at the table, and Mom had prepared his favorite meal with all the heart-healthy modifications his cardiologist had recommended. It should have been a celebration of his recovery progress and our family's resilience during a difficult time. Instead, the dinner conversation focused almost entirely on Morgan's latest relationship drama. She had been dating someone named Trevor for about 2 months, and apparently, the relationship was becoming complicated because Trevor wanted to move in together, while Morgan wasn't ready for that level of commitment. The entire meal revolved around analyzing Trevor's motivations, discussing Morgan's feelings about cohabitation, and debating whether she should continue the relationship or end it before things became more serious. What frustrated me most wasn't the topic itself. Relationship decisions are important and deserve family discussion, but the way Morgan's personal drama completely overshadowed Dad's recovery milestones and Mom's caregiving efforts. Dad had successfully completed his first week of cardiac rehabilitation and received encouraging feedback from his physical therapist, but this achievement was barely mentioned. Mom had been managing a complex medication schedule and dietary plan while dealing with her own stress about Dad's health, but her efforts were acknowledged only in passing. As I listened to Morgan describe her relationship dilemmas in elaborate detail, I realized that this dynamic was exactly the same pattern that had existed throughout our childhood and young adulthood. Morgan's emotional needs and personal interests always seemed to take center stage in family conversations, while practical achievements and behind-the-scenes efforts received minimal attention or appreciation. The conversation that evening also revealed something else about Morgan's perspective on adult responsibilities. When Dad gently suggested that Morgan might want to consider finding more stable employment now that she was approaching 30, Morgan responded that she was still figuring out her career path and didn't want to get locked into something she might not enjoy long-term. When Mom mentioned that having consistent income might make relationship decisions easier, Morgan said she preferred to make romantic choices based on emotional compatibility rather than financial considerations. These weren't unreasonable positions in themselves, but they reflected a luxury of choice that was only possible because someone else was handling the practical necessities of adult life. Morgan could afford to be selective about employment because her health insurance didn't depend on her job. She could afford to prioritize emotional compatibility in relationships because her basic living expenses were minimal thanks to living at home and having someone else cover her medical costs. As the evening progressed, I found myself calculating the monthly cost of Morgan's lifestyle choices. The health insurance I provided for her cost me nearly $200 per month. Her ability to work part-time rather than seeking full-time employment with benefits probably cost her at least $1,000 monthly in lost income. Her casual approach to career development would likely cost her tens of thousands of dollars in lifetime earning potential compared to someone who pursued professional advancement more aggressively. But Morgan seemed completely unaware of these financial calculations because someone else was absorbing the costs of her choices. She could maintain her idealistic approach to work and relationships because the practical consequences of that approach were being handled invisibly by someone else, specifically by me. That night, as I drove home to my downtown Phoenix apartment, I began to seriously consider what would happen if I stopped providing the invisible financial support that made everyone else's choices possible. The comprehensive health insurance that allowed Morgan to work part-time and focus on relationship drama was actually something I could modify or cancel with a simple phone call to my benefits administrator. The financial security that let our parents focus on Dad's recovery without panic about medical bills was actually dependent on my continued employment and willingness to share my benefits. For the first time, I started to think about using my financial power not just to support my family, but to force them to confront the reality of their situation. What if Morgan had to find full-time employment with benefits because her health insurance suddenly became her own responsibility? What if our parents had to face the true cost of Dad's medical care without the comprehensive coverage I had been providing? These weren't comfortable thoughts, but they were becoming unavoidable as I watched my family take for granted a level of financial security that existed only because of my hidden contributions. The question was whether I had the courage to make visible the support I had been providing invisibly, and whether I was prepared for the consequences of that revelation. Part 4. The secret arrangement revealed. The decision to secretly fund my family's health insurance had seemed straightforward when I first made it 6 years earlier. I was 26, newly promoted to a senior position at Phoenix Premium Insurance, and financially stable in ways that my parents and Morgan were not. The family plan option through my employer's benefits was expensive but comprehensive, and adding family members seemed like a natural way to use my professional advantages to help the people I loved most. What I hadn't anticipated was how complex and emotionally charged this arrangement would become over time. Initially, I told myself it was temporary assistance, just until Dad's auto shop business recovered from the economic downturn, just until Mom could find a better paying position, just until Morgan finished college and started her career. But as months turned into years, the temporary support became a permanent fixture in our family's financial structure, and my resentment about the secrecy began to grow. The mechanics of maintaining the secret required more effort than I had expected. Every year during open enrollment, I had to carefully select benefit options that would provide the best coverage for my family's specific health needs while staying within my budget. When Morgan needed dental work, I had to research which procedures would be covered and help her navigate the insurance approval process without revealing that I was the one who had selected her dental plan. When Dad started taking blood pressure medication, I had to ensure that his prescriptions were included in our formulary coverage. Most challenging was managing the financial aspects of the arrangement. The premium costs increased each year, reaching nearly $500 monthly by the time Dad had his heart attack. This represented a significant portion of my income, money that I could have been saving for my own future or using to build the kind of lifestyle that my salary should have supported. Instead, I was living in a modest apartment, driving an older car, and carefully budgeting my expenses to ensure I could continue covering everyone else's healthcare costs. The emotional cost was even higher than the financial cost. Every family gathering included conversations about medical care, insurance coverage, or healthcare expenses that I couldn't participate in honestly. When Dad praised the excellent insurance coverage he believed came through his work, I had to smile and nod rather than acknowledging my role in arranging it. When Morgan complained about co-pays or prescription costs, I had to listen without mentioning that I had specifically selected low co-pay options to make healthcare affordable for our family. Most frustrating were the times when family members criticized insurance companies or healthcare systems without realizing that I worked in that industry and was actively using my professional knowledge to benefit them. Morgan once spent an entire dinner ranting about how insurance companies were greedy and exploitative, while I sat quietly knowing that my employer was actually providing her with excellent coverage at a fraction of what it would cost her on the individual market. The secret also affected my own healthcare decisions. I couldn't discuss my medical needs or concerns with my family because any mention of insurance processes or coverage details might reveal my professional involvement in our family's benefits. When I had to have a minor surgical procedure 2 years earlier, I handled all the insurance coordination myself and told my family only the basic facts about my recovery. They assumed I was being private about personal health matters, when actually I was avoiding conversations that might expose the financial arrangement I had created. Over time, I began to realize that the secrecy was enabling unhealthy patterns in our family relationships. By handling all the complex aspects of healthcare coverage behind the scenes, I was allowing everyone else to remain ignorant about the costs and logistics of medical care. Morgan could work part-time and live casually because she didn't understand that comprehensive health insurance for someone her age typically costs several $100s per month. Our parents could focus on other financial priorities because they didn't realize that healthcare security was consuming a significant portion of someone else's budget. The arrangement also meant that I was making healthcare decisions for people who didn't know I was making them. When I selected our annual benefits, I was choosing deductible levels, prescription coverage options, and provider networks that would affect my family's medical care throughout the year. I was using my professional expertise to optimize our coverage, but no one else had input into these decisions or even knew they were being made on their behalf. As Dad's cardiac crisis unfolded, the complexity of managing this secret became almost overwhelming. I had to coordinate with insurance representatives while pretending that I was just a family member helping with paperwork, rather than the policyholder who had designed our coverage specifically for situations like this. I had to answer detailed questions about our benefits while acting as if I was researching the information rather than drawing on my intimate knowledge of the policy terms I had selected. The most difficult aspect was watching my family's relief and gratitude about our insurance coverage, while knowing that their sense of security was entirely dependent on my continued willingness and ability to provide it. When Dr. Martinez mentioned that Dad's cardiac rehabilitation would be fully covered under our excellent insurance plan, Mom actually teared up with relief. When the hospital financial counselor told us that our out-of-pocket costs would be minimal thanks to our comprehensive coverage, Dad squeezed my hand and said he felt blessed to have such good insurance through his work. These moments of family gratitude were simultaneously heartwarming and infuriating. I was genuinely happy that I could protect my family from financial stress during Dad's medical crisis, but I was also frustrated that they had no idea who was actually protecting them or what it cost to provide that protection. Their gratitude was directed toward abstract institutions, Dad's employer, insurance companies, government programs, rather than toward the person who was actually ensuring their healthcare security. The arrangement had also created a strange dynamic, where I knew more about my family's healthcare situation than they did. I received all the insurance statements and benefit summaries, so I knew exactly which doctors they were seeing, what procedures they were having, and how much everything cost. I knew that Morgan had visited urgent care 3 times in the past year for minor issues that could have been handled by a primary care physician if she had bothered to establish care with one. I knew that Mom had been putting off a mammography screening that would have been completely covered under our preventive care benefits. This knowledge felt like a violation of their privacy, even though I was accessing it in my role as policyholder rather than as a curious family member. I knew details about their health and healthcare decisions that they had never shared with me directly, and I couldn't act on this information without revealing the source of my knowledge. When Morgan mentioned feeling tired and stressed, I wanted to suggest that she schedule a comprehensive physical exam that would be fully covered under our plan, but I couldn't make that suggestion without explaining how I knew about her coverage options. The financial strain of maintaining the secret was also affecting my own life choices in ways that my family didn't understand. I had been dating Kevin, an architect who worked for a sustainable design firm, for nearly 2 years. Our relationship was serious enough that we had discussed moving in together, but I was hesitant to combine finances or make joint decisions about health insurance that might reveal the complex arrangement I had with my family. Kevin sometimes asked questions about my budgeting or financial priorities that I couldn't answer honestly. He knew I had a good job and made a decent salary, but he also noticed that I was more careful about spending than my income seemed to require. When he suggested that we could afford a nicer apartment if we moved in together, I had to deflect without explaining that nearly $500 of my monthly budget was already committed to family healthcare costs that no one knew about. The relationship strain extended beyond financial concerns. Kevin had met my family several times and genuinely liked them, but he sometimes made observations about our family dynamics that I couldn't address honestly. He noticed that Morgan seemed to have a lot of flexibility in her work schedule and lifestyle choices compared to most people our age, but he didn't understand that this flexibility was subsidized by someone else's financial responsibility. He commented that our parents seemed remarkably calm about healthcare costs, considering Dad's age and Mom's work situation, but he didn't know that their calm was based on coverage they didn't realize they had. Most significantly, Kevin had started talking about our future together in ways that forced me to confront the long-term implications of my secret arrangement. If we got married, would I continue carrying health insurance for my parents and Morgan? Would I tell him about the costs I was covering? And if so, would he be comfortable with that financial commitment affecting our household budget? Would our future children's college savings or our retirement planning be impacted by my ongoing family support obligations? These questions were becoming urgent as Dad's recovery progressed and our family began to settle into new routines. The cardiac crisis had reminded everyone of the importance of health insurance and medical security, but it had also highlighted how dependent our family's well-being was on arrangements that only I understood or controlled. Morgan continued to work part-time and live casually, completely unaware that her healthcare security could disappear if I changed jobs, got married, or simply decided I could no longer afford to support everyone else's coverage. Our parents were making long-term plans for Dad's career transition and retirement based on assumptions about healthcare coverage that weren't actually secure beyond my continued willingness to provide it. They were considering whether Dad should retire early or transition to part-time consulting work, but these decisions would have very different implications if they had to arrange their own comprehensive health insurance, rather than relying on coverage they didn't realize came through my employment. The secret that had started as a generous gesture was increasingly feeling like a trap that limited everyone's ability to make informed decisions about their lives. My family was making choices based on financial security that existed only as long as I maintained it, while I was making choices based on obligations that no one else knew I had taken on. The arrangement that was supposed to help everyone was actually constraining everyone in different ways. As I watched Morgan navigate her relationship drama and career indecision, without any awareness of the financial realities that made her choices possible, I began to realize that the secret arrangement was ultimately harmful to everyone involved. She couldn't make mature adult decisions about work and relationships because she didn't understand the true costs and trade-offs of adult life. Our parents couldn't make informed decisions about Dad's career and retirement because they didn't understand their actual healthcare situation. And I couldn't make honest decisions about my own future because I was carrying invisible obligations that affected every aspect of my financial and personal planning. The generous impulse that had led me to share my insurance benefits with my family had evolved into a complex web of secrecy and resentment that was beginning to damage the relationships I had been trying to protect. The question was whether I was ready to untangle this web by making visible the financial support I had been providing invisibly, and whether I was prepared for the ways that revelation might change our family dynamics permanently. Part 5. Protagonist's achievements overshadowed the success I had achieved in my insurance career should have been a source of family pride and celebration, but instead it often felt like my accomplishments were minimized or overlooked in favor of Morgan's ongoing personal drama. By the time Dad had his heart attack, I had been promoted 4 times in 6 years at Phoenix Premium Insurance, progressing from entry-level underwriter to senior team lead with supervisory responsibilities, and a salary that placed me in the top 20% of earners for my age group in Arizona. These promotions hadn't come easily or automatically. Each advancement required demonstrating expertise in increasingly complex aspects of insurance regulation, risk assessment, and client management. I had earned professional certifications in property and casualty insurance, completed advanced training in commercial underwriting, and developed specialized knowledge in healthcare policy administration that made me one of the most knowledgeable employees in my division. My expertise was particularly valuable in the growing field of corporate health benefits, where companies needed guidance on selecting insurance plans that would attract and retain employees while managing costs effectively. I had become the go-to person in our office for complex benefit design questions, and my recommendations had helped several major clients save hundreds of thousands of dollars annually while improving their employees' healthcare coverage. But when I tried to share these professional achievements with my family, the conversations invariably shifted to other topics, or were overshadowed by whatever crisis or excitement was happening in Morgan's life. When I received my most recent promotion to senior team lead, with a salary increase that put me over $70,000 annually, the family dinner where I shared this news was dominated by Morgan's announcement that she was thinking about getting her real estate license. The contrast was striking and painful. My actual career advancement, with concrete financial benefits and increased professional responsibilities, received polite congratulations and a few questions about my new duties. Morgan's vague idea about potentially entering real estate, with no specific timeline or preparation plan, generated enthusiastic discussion about the flexibility of real estate careers, the potential for high earnings, and how her personality would be perfect for helping people find homes. This pattern had repeated throughout my professional development. When I completed my first major insurance certification, requiring months of study and a comprehensive exam, the achievement was acknowledged briefly before conversation moved to Morgan's decision to change her college major for the third time. When I was selected to represent our company at a regional insurance conference, speaking about innovative approaches to healthcare benefit design, the recognition was mentioned in passing during a family dinner focused primarily on Morgan's latest relationship developments. The most frustrating aspect was that my family seemed to view my career success as somehow inevitable or automatic, while treating Morgan's much smaller accomplishments as extraordinary achievements that deserved extensive celebration. When I received recognition from our industry association for my work on a complex commercial insurance case, Mom's response was, "Well, of course you did well. You've always been good at that kind of thing." When Morgan completed a part-time retail management training program, the same achievement was celebrated with a dinner out and a small gift, accompanied by discussions about how proud everyone was of her commitment and growth. This differential treatment extended beyond career achievements to other aspects of our adult lives. When I bought my first car with my own money, a reliable used Honda that fit my budget and transportation needs, the purchase was treated as a practical decision that required little comment or celebration. When Morgan bought her first car 2 years later, using a loan that our parents co-signed and making payments that represented a significant portion of her part-time income, the event was treated as a major milestone that warranted a family celebration and multiple social media posts. The pattern was even more pronounced when it came to relationships and social achievements. My relationship with Kevin, which had been stable and supportive for 2 years, was often taken for granted in family conversations. We were viewed as the settled couple who didn't need much attention or concern, while Morgan's rotating series of dramatic relationships generated extensive family involvement and emotional investment. When Kevin and I reached our 2-year anniversary, we celebrated quietly with dinner at a nice restaurant and a weekend trip to Sedona. When I mentioned our anniversary plans to my family, the response was warm but brief. Everyone was happy that we were doing well together, but there wasn't much to discuss since our relationship was stable and drama-free. When Morgan had been dating Trevor for 2 months and they had their first serious fight, that relationship crisis dominated family conversation for weeks, with everyone offering advice and emotional support to help Morgan navigate the situation. The differential treatment wasn't necessarily intentional or malicious, but it reflected deeply ingrained assumptions about our respective roles within the family. I was viewed as the competent, self-sufficient daughter who would figure things out on her own and didn't need much support or attention. Morgan was viewed as the sensitive, artistic daughter who needed guidance, encouragement, and celebration to help her navigate the challenges of adult life. These assumptions meant that my achievements were often seen as confirmation of existing expectations, rather than noteworthy accomplishments worth celebrating. When I succeeded professionally, it was because I was naturally good at business and finance. When I maintained a stable relationship, it was because I was the type of person who was good at relationships. When I managed my finances responsibly and built savings, it was because I was naturally practical and organized. Meanwhile, Morgan's much smaller achievements were viewed as evidence of personal growth and development that deserved recognition and encouragement. When she completed projects at her part-time jobs, it was because she was learning to be more responsible. When she maintained relationships for a few months, it was because she was developing better communication skills. When she managed to save money for purchases she wanted, it was because she was becoming more mature about financial planning. The irony was that my family's assumptions about my natural competence were partially based on financial security that I was providing without their knowledge. My ability to be financially responsible and career-focused was easier because I had comprehensive health insurance through my employer, the same insurance that covered their healthcare needs as well. The weeks following Dad's discharge from St. Mary's General Hospital revealed new layers of family dysfunction that I had never noticed so clearly before. As Dad settled into his recovery routine at home, with daily cardiac rehabilitation sessions and a complex medication schedule, I found myself becoming the unofficial family coordinator for all medical-related decisions and communications. This role fell to me naturally because of my insurance industry expertise. But it also highlighted how completely my family had come to depend on my behind-the-scenes management of their healthcare needs. Every insurance authorization, every billing question, every coverage verification request was directed to me as if I were employed as the family's personal insurance advocate, rather than someone who had other professional responsibilities and personal priorities. The most revealing incidents occurred during Dad's follow-up appointments with Dr. Martinez and the cardiac rehabilitation team. These appointments were crucial for monitoring Dad's recovery progress and adjusting his treatment plan as needed. But they also involved complex insurance procedures that required advance authorization and careful coordination with our benefits provider. During the first few appointments, I accompanied Dad and Mom to help navigate the insurance paperwork and ensure that all procedures were properly documented for coverage purposes. I noticed that Mom seemed genuinely grateful for my assistance, recognizing that the administrative aspects of healthcare were overwhelming during an already stressful time. Dad appreciated having someone who could communicate effectively with insurance representatives and medical billing staff. Morgan, however, seemed to view my involvement as simply another example of my natural tendency to handle complicated tasks that other people found difficult. She never offered to learn about the insurance processes herself, never asked questions about how authorizations worked, or what would happen if coverage was denied. Instead, she made casual comments about how convenient it was that I enjoyed dealing with boring paperwork stuff, while she focused on providing emotional support to our parents. The casual dismissal of my contributions as something I naturally enjoyed, rather than something that required significant time and expertise, was particularly galling, because I knew exactly how much effort was involved in maintaining our family's healthcare coverage. Every month, I spent hours reviewing benefit statements, tracking claims, and ensuring that all family members were receiving appropriate preventative care. Every year during open enrollment, I researched plan options and made strategic decisions about deductibles, copays, and provider networks based on our family's specific health needs and financial constraints. But from Morgan's perspective, these tasks seemed to happen automatically, managed by some combination of my professional expertise and natural inclination toward administrative work. She had no idea that I was spending my evenings and weekends coordinating her dental appointments, researching coverage options for her prescription medications, and troubleshooting billing issues that arose from her casual approach to healthcare documentation. The depth of Morgan's ignorance about our family's insurance situation became most apparent during a conversation about her own healthcare needs. She mentioned casually that she had been putting off seeing a gynecologist for her annual exam because she assumed it would be expensive, and she wasn't sure if her insurance would cover it. When I explained that preventative care visits were fully covered under our plan with no copay required, she seemed surprised and pleased, as if this was new information, rather than a benefit feature I had specifically selected because I knew it would encourage regular healthcare maintenance. "That's great," Morgan said, already pulling out her phone to search for gynecologists in her area. "I love having good insurance. It makes everything so much easier." Her comment crystallized something that had been bothering me for months. Morgan didn't just take our family's healthcare coverage for granted. She had somehow convinced herself that having excellent insurance was a stroke of good fortune, rather than the result of someone's careful planning and financial sacrifice. She appreciated the benefits of comprehensive coverage without ever questioning how that coverage had been obtained or what it cost to maintain. This attitude extended to other aspects of our family's financial situation as well. When Dad's cardiologist recommended that he invest in a home blood pressure monitoring system and a digital scale for tracking his recovery progress, Morgan immediately suggested that these purchases would probably be covered by insurance since they were medical necessities. When I explained that durable medical equipment required special authorization and might not be fully covered, she seemed confident that I would figure out a way to make it work through my insurance connections. The expectation that I would somehow manipulate our insurance coverage to provide maximum benefits for everyone else's needs was both flattering and exhausting. Morgan seemed to believe that my professional expertise gave me almost magical abilities to obtain coverage for any medical expense or procedure our family might need. She had no understanding of the actual limitations of insurance policies or the significant costs associated with comprehensive healthcare coverage. More troubling was Morgan's complete lack of curiosity about what would happen if our current insurance situation changed. When I mentioned during one family dinner that my employer was considering changes to their benefits package that might affect employee costs, Morgan's only response was to ask whether the changes would be good or bad for our family. She showed no interest in understanding the details of the potential changes or developing contingency plans in case our coverage became less favorable. The conversation revealed that Morgan had never considered the possibility that our family's healthcare security might be temporary or dependent on factors beyond their control. In her mind, good insurance was simply a feature of middle-class family life, like having a reliable car or living in a safe neighborhood. She had never contemplated what would happen if the primary insurance holder lost their job, changed employers, or decided that the cost of family coverage was no longer manageable. This lack of awareness about healthcare economics was particularly striking given Morgan's age and educational background. At 28, with a college degree and several years of work experience, she should have understood the basic realities of adult healthcare costs and insurance coverage. The fact that she remained ignorant about these fundamental aspects of financial independence suggested that someone had been shielding her from the practical consequences of her lifestyle choices for too long. The shielding wasn't limited to insurance coverage. As I paid closer attention to Morgan's spending patterns and financial decision-making during Dad's recovery period, I began to notice other ways that her lifestyle was subsidized by invisible support systems she didn't recognize or acknowledge. Living at home with our parents allowed Morgan to maintain a standard of living that would have been impossible on her part-time retail income. She had no rent or mortgage payments, minimal utility costs, and access to home-cooked meals that significantly reduced her food expenses. She could afford to spend money on clothes, entertainment, and social activities because her basic living costs were covered by someone else. But Morgan seemed to view these arrangements as natural expressions of family support, rather than significant financial assistance that enabled her casual approach to employment and career development. When she mentioned to friends that she was lucky to have such supportive parents who didn't pressure her to move out or find full-time work, she presented the situation as evidence of her family's love and understanding, rather than acknowledgement of the economic value of the support she was receiving. The contrast with my own post-college experience was stark and increasingly frustrating. When I graduated from Arizona State University, I had immediately found full-time employment with benefits and moved into my own apartment, even though it meant living on a tight budget and building savings slowly. I had made these choices because I understood that adult independence required taking responsibility for my own living expenses and healthcare costs. Morgan, on the other hand, had been able to extend her transition to full adult independence indefinitely, because other people were covering the costs that would have forced her to make more decisive career and lifestyle choices. She could afford to be selective about employment opportunities because she didn't need a job that provided health insurance. She could maintain an expensive social life because she had minimal fixed expenses. She could postpone decisions about long-term career goals because she wasn't facing financial pressure to establish stable income. These differences in our post-college experiences had created vastly different levels of financial literacy and personal responsibility. I had learned to budget carefully, research insurance options, and make strategic decisions about employment based on total compensation rather than just salary. Morgan had learned to assume that financial security would be provided by others, and that her primary responsibility was to focus on personal fulfillment and relationship satisfaction. The disparity was becoming more pronounced as we both approached our 30s and faced different expectations about adult achievement and independence. My friends and colleagues expected me to be building equity in real estate, maximizing retirement contributions, and making strategic career moves that would position me for long-term financial success. Morgan's friends seemed to accept her extended period of exploration and casual employment as a normal part of finding her authentic path in life. But Morgan's extended exploration was only possible because of financial support systems that she didn't understand or acknowledge. The comprehensive health insurance that allowed her to work part-time without worrying about medical costs was actually a significant monthly expense that someone else was covering. The housing security that allowed her to focus on personal growth rather than basic survival was actually a substantial economic benefit that represented thousands of dollars in value each year. As Dad's recovery progressed, and our family began to discuss long-term plans for his career transition and retirement, these hidden support systems became increasingly relevant to everyone's future security. Dad was considering whether to return to full-time work at the auto shop or transition to consulting work that would be less physically demanding, but potentially less lucrative. Mom was thinking about whether to remain at the dental office or explore other employment options that might be more flexible but offer different benefits packages. These discussions were taking place without full information about our family's actual healthcare situation, because no one except me understood how our current insurance coverage worked or what it would cost to replace if circumstances changed. Dad was making decisions about retirement timing based on assumptions about healthcare coverage that weren't accurate. Mom was evaluating job opportunities without understanding how changes in her employment might affect our family's overall benefits situation. Most significantly, Morgan was making casual decisions about her own career development without any awareness that her healthcare security and financial flexibility depended on arrangements that could change at any time. She had been casually considering various career options: real estate licensing, social media marketing, possibly returning to school for a master's degree, without understanding that these choices had very different implications, depending on whether she needed to obtain her own health insurance and pay her own living expenses. The family planning conversations were becoming increasingly surreal as I listened to everyone discuss their futures based on assumptions about financial security that existed only as long as I continued to provide invisible support. They were making decisions about Dad's career, Mom's employment, and Morgan's professional development, as if our family's healthcare coverage and financial stability were independent variables, rather than outcomes that depended on my continued willingness and ability to maintain complex support arrangements. The most difficult aspect was that I couldn't participate honestly in these planning conversations without revealing the extent of my hidden financial contributions. When Dad asked whether I thought it would be safe for him to reduce his work hours, I wanted to explain that his current healthcare security didn't actually depend on his employment status. When Mom wondered whether she could afford to take a lower-paying job with better working conditions, I wanted to tell her that her healthcare costs were already covered, regardless of her employment decisions. When Morgan mentioned that she was thinking about traveling to Europe for a month to find inspiration for her next career phase, I wanted to ask how she planned to maintain health insurance coverage while unemployed and traveling internationally. But I couldn't raise these practical questions without explaining why I was so knowledgeable about our family's insurance situation and why I was concerned about the financial implications of everyone else's choices. The gap between my family's assumptions about their financial security and the reality of their dependence on my invisible support was creating an increasingly untenable situation. They were making life decisions based on false premises, while I was making life decisions based on obligations that no one else knew I had undertaken. The longer this pattern continued, the more difficult it would become to address honestly, without causing significant disruption to everyone's plans and expectations. As I watched Morgan navigate her relationship drama with Trevor, while casually assuming that her healthcare and financial security would continue indefinitely regardless of her choices, I began to realize that the secret support system I had created was actually preventing my family from developing the adult competencies they would need to manage their own lives successfully. By shielding them from the real costs and complexities of healthcare coverage, I was enabling a level of financial immaturity that was ultimately harmful to everyone involved. The question was whether I was ready to force a confrontation that would make visible the invisible support I had been providing, and whether I was prepared for the ways that revelation might change our family relationships permanently. Part 4. The secret arrangement revealed. Continued. The complexity of maintaining my secret insurance arrangement became exponentially more challenging during Dad's cardiac recovery, but it also provided me with unprecedented insight into how completely my family had come to depend on coverage they didn't understand or acknowledge. Every aspect of Dad's medical care, from the initial emergency surgery to ongoing rehabilitation, required insurance authorizations and coverage verifications that I managed behind the scenes, while pretending to be simply a helpful family member rather than the policyholder who controlled every aspect of our benefits. The most elaborate deception occurred during the pre-authorization process for Dad's cardiac rehabilitation program. This specialized treatment required extensive documentation of medical necessity, coordination between multiple healthcare providers, and approval from our insurance company's case management team. The process typically took several weeks and required detailed knowledge of our policy's specific coverage criteria and approval procedures. Because I worked in the insurance industry and had designed our family's coverage specifically to include comprehensive cardiac care benefits, I knew exactly which documentation would be required and how to present Dad's case to ensure rapid approval. I spent hours after work preparing the necessary paperwork, coordinating with Dr. Martinez's office, and communicating with our insurance company's medical review team to expedite the authorization process. But I had to manage all of this coordination while maintaining the fiction that I was simply a concerned daughter helping with administrative tasks, rather than the policyholder who had intimate knowledge of our coverage terms and approval procedures. When Dr. Martinez's office called with questions about our insurance benefits, I had to provide detailed answers while pretending that I was researching the information rather than drawing on my professional expertise and personal knowledge of the policy I had designed. The most challenging moment came when the insurance company's case manager called me directly to discuss Dad's treatment plan and verify that our family understood the long-term care requirements that would be covered under our policy. This was actually a routine call that I would have handled efficiently in my professional capacity, but in the context of our family's situation, it required me to have a complex conversation about medical necessity and coverage criteria while pretending that I was learning this information for the first time. The case manager, who was actually a colleague from another division of our company, recognized my voice and began the conversation with friendly professional chatter about mutual acquaintances and recent changes in our industry. I had to quickly redirect the conversation to focus on Dad's medical needs while avoiding any discussion that might reveal my professional role in designing our family's coverage, or my personal knowledge of insurance procedures that most policyholders wouldn't possess. After the call, I realized that maintaining the secret was becoming increasingly complicated, as Dad's medical needs intersected with my professional expertise in ways that were difficult to explain without raising questions. My family was beginning to notice that I seemed unusually knowledgeable about insurance procedures, and that coverage approvals were happening more quickly and smoothly than they had expected, based on horror stories they had heard from friends about insurance bureaucracy and delays. When Mom commented that we seemed to be lucky with our insurance company and that everything was being approved so efficiently, I had to agree with her assessment, while knowing that the efficiency was actually the result of my professional knowledge and strategic approach to managing our case rather than good fortune. When Dad praised our insurance company's customer service and responsiveness, I had to nod appreciatively while knowing that the responsiveness was partly due to my insider knowledge of how to navigate their systems effectively. The deception was also affecting my relationships with colleagues at work. Several people in my division were involved in processing claims and authorizations related to cardiac care, and I occasionally encountered paperwork or case discussions related to Dad's treatment during my normal work activities. I had to be careful not to show special interest in these cases or demonstrate knowledge about specific patients that I shouldn't have possessed in my professional capacity. More significantly, I was using my professional relationships and industry knowledge in ways that benefited my family but might have raised ethical questions if my colleagues had understood the personal nature of my involvement. When I sought advice from medical reviewers about cardiac rehabilitation coverage criteria, I was technically gathering information to help my family navigate the system, but I was presenting these inquiries as professional development questions rather than personal advocacy efforts. The ethical complexity of using my professional position to benefit my family was something I tried not to examine too closely, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore as Dad's care became more complex and expensive. The comprehensive coverage that was enabling his recovery was not just insurance that I was paying for. It was coverage that I had designed using my professional expertise to anticipate and address the specific medical needs that older adults in our family might face. This level of strategic planning went far beyond simply sharing my employee benefits with family members. I had actually created a comprehensive healthcare security system based on my professional knowledge of insurance products, medical costs, and coverage optimization strategies. I had selected specific benefit features, provider networks, and coverage levels that would provide maximum protection for our family's potential health needs while minimizing out-of-pocket costs and administrative complications. The system I had created was so sophisticated that it would have been impossible for someone without insurance industry expertise to replicate or even understand fully. Dad's cardiac emergency was being managed so smoothly, not just because we had good insurance, but but because I had specifically designed our coverage to handle exactly this type of medical crisis with minimal financial impact and administrative burden. But the sophistication of the system also meant that it was completely dependent on my continued employment in the insurance industry and my ongoing willingness to manage the complex administrative and financial aspects of our coverage. If I changed careers, lost my job, or simply decided that the responsibility was too burdensome, our family's healthcare security would disappear overnight in ways that would be difficult for them to understand or replace. The dependency was particularly concerning because none of my family members had developed the knowledge or skills that would allow them to manage their own healthcare coverage independently. Morgan had never researched insurance options, compared coverage benefits, or dealt with claims disputes because someone else was handling all of these responsibilities invisibly. Our parents had never needed to understand the details of their coverage because they assumed it was provided through Dad's employment and would continue as long as he remained eligible for workplace benefits. Even more troubling was the realization that my secret arrangement was preventing my family from developing realistic expectations about healthcare costs and coverage limitations. They had come to expect that medical care would be readily available, that procedures would be approved quickly, and that out-of-pocket costs would be minimal because they had never experienced healthcare under less comprehensive coverage. This false sense of security was particularly dangerous for Morgan, who was making casual decisions about her career and lifestyle without understanding that her access to comprehensive healthcare was entirely dependent on my continued employment and willingness to include her in my benefits. At 28, she should have been developing strategies for obtaining independent health insurance and building savings to cover medical expenses, but instead, she was operating under the assumption that healthcare would always be someone else's responsibility. The arrangement was also limiting my own professional and personal options in ways that my family didn't understand or acknowledge. I couldn't consider job opportunities with smaller companies that might not offer family coverage options. I couldn't negotiate for higher salary in lieu of benefits because our family's healthcare security depended on maintaining comprehensive insurance coverage. I couldn't make decisions about marriage or starting my own family without considering how those changes might affect my ability to continue covering everyone else's medical needs. Most significantly, the financial cost of maintaining comprehensive coverage for 4 adults was consuming a substantial portion of my income in ways that limited my own ability to build savings, invest in real estate, or pursue personal goals that required significant financial resources. The $500 per month that I was spending on family health insurance premiums represented $6,000 annually that I could have been using to maximize my retirement contributions, save for a house down payment, or build an emergency fund for my own future security. The opportunity cost was even higher when I considered the career limitations that came with needing to maintain specific employment benefits. I had turned down several potentially lucrative job opportunities because they didn't offer the family coverage options that our healthcare arrangement required. I had avoided entrepreneurial ventures or consulting opportunities that might have increased my earning potential because they would have required giving up the employer-sponsored insurance that formed the foundation of our family's healthcare security. The secret arrangement had also affected my relationship with Kevin in ways that were becoming increasingly problematic as our relationship became more serious. He had begun asking questions about our future together that I couldn't answer honestly without revealing the extent of my financial obligations to my family. When he suggested that we could afford to buy a house together if we combined our incomes and savings, I had to deflect without explaining that my disposable income was significantly lower than my salary suggested because of hidden family support costs. Kevin had also begun making observations about my family's lifestyle and spending patterns that I couldn't address honestly. He noticed that Morgan seemed to have significant flexibility in her work schedule and lifestyle choices despite her part-time employment, but he didn't understand that this flexibility was subsidized by someone else's financial responsibility. He commented that our parents seemed remarkably unconcerned about healthcare costs and retirement planning, despite Dad's recent cardiac emergency, but he didn't know that their peace of mind was based on coverage arrangements they didn't realize existed. Most concerning was Kevin's growing interest in our family's insurance situation, as he considered how our potential marriage might affect both of our benefits packages. He had excellent insurance through his architectural firm and had assumed that we would eventually need to coordinate our coverage to avoid duplication and maximize our household's healthcare benefits. But I couldn't engage in these practical planning conversations without revealing that my insurance decisions were already constrained by family obligations that he didn't know about. The web of secrecy was becoming so complex that I was beginning to make mistakes that threatened to expose the arrangement. During a recent conversation with Morgan about her dental care, I had accidentally demonstrated too much knowledge about her specific coverage benefits and appointment history, prompting her to ask how I knew so much about her insurance situation. I had deflected by claiming that I had helped her research the information when she first needed dental work, but the explanation felt thin and unconvincing. Similar near discoveries were happening with increasing frequency as my professional expertise intersected with our family's medical needs in ways that were difficult to explain without revealing my role as policyholder. When Dad asked how I knew so much about cardiac rehabilitation coverage criteria, I had to claim that I had researched the information to help him understand his options, rather than acknowledging that I had professional knowledge of these benefits because I worked in the industry and had specifically designed our coverage to include them. The most dangerous moment came when Mom received a benefit statement in the mail that included detailed information about our family's coverage and premium costs. She mentioned casually that she was confused by some of the technical language and asked if I could help her understand what the document meant. I had to review my own handiwork, a benefit summary for the policy I had designed and funded, while pretending to be learning about our coverage for the first time. As I explained the various benefit features and coverage levels listed in the document, I realized that I was essentially giving my family a detailed description of the insurance protection I had created for them, while maintaining the fiction that this protection had materialized through Dad's employment or some other mysterious mechanism. The conversation highlighted how completely my family had come to depend on coverage they didn't understand, and how elaborate the deceptions had become that were necessary to maintain their ignorance about the source of their healthcare security. The psychological toll of maintaining these elaborate deceptions was becoming overwhelming, particularly as Dad's recovery progressed, and our family began making long-term plans based on assumptions about healthcare coverage that weren't accurate or sustainable. I was exhausted by the constant vigilance required to avoid accidentally revealing my professional knowledge or personal involvement in our family's insurance arrangements. More troubling was the growing realization that the secret arrangement was ultimately harmful to everyone involved, including me. My family was making important life decisions based on false premises about their financial security, while I was making life decisions based on obligations that prevented me from pursuing my own goals and interests. The generous impulse that had led me to share my insurance benefits with my family had evolved into a complex system of financial control and emotional manipulation that was limiting everyone's ability to develop authentic adult relationships and realistic expectations about independence and responsibility. The question was whether I had the courage to end the secrecy by revealing the true source of our family's healthcare coverage, and whether I was prepared for the ways that revelation might force everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationships and dependencies. Part 5. Protagonist's achievements overshadowed, continued, emergency healthcare costs. Unlike most people my age, who had to balance career advancement against the need for comprehensive insurance coverage, the invisible subsidy I was providing to my family created a fundamental unfairness in how our respective achievements were perceived and valued. My career success was viewed as natural and expected partly because I appeared to have fewer financial constraints and family obligations than most people my age. Morgan's much smaller accomplishments were celebrated as remarkable progress, partly because everyone assumed she was navigating adult life with the same financial constraints and healthcare concerns that most young adults face. But the reality was exactly the opposite. I was achieving professional success despite carrying significant hidden financial obligations that constrained my choices and limited my options. Morgan was struggling to achieve even basic adult milestones, despite having access to financial support and healthcare security that most people her age could only dream of having. The distortion was particularly evident in how our family talked about our respective relationships and personal lives. My relationship with Kevin was viewed as stable and successful, but also somewhat predictable given my naturally responsible personality and good judgment about men. The implication was that stable relationships came easily to me because of my inherent characteristics, rather than because I had worked hard to develop healthy relationship skills and had made careful choices about partners. Morgan's much more chaotic relationship history was discussed with sympathy and understanding, as if her pattern of dramatic breakups and poor partner choices was simply the result of being more emotionally sensitive and having higher standards for romantic compatibility. The family narrative suggested that Morgan's relationship struggles were evidence of her depth and authenticity, while my relationship stability was evidence of my practical nature and lower emotional needs. This interpretation ignored the very different contexts in which Morgan and I were navigating adult relationships. I had to be careful about relationship choices partly because my financial situation was more complex than it appeared, with hidden obligations that would affect any future partner's life decisions. I couldn't afford to date casually or make impulsive romantic choices because my responsibilities to my family meant that my personal decisions had broader implications for other people's security and well-being. Morgan, on the other hand, could afford to prioritize emotional compatibility and personal fulfillment in her relationship choices because she didn't have to consider the practical implications of her romantic decisions. She could date men who were financially unstable, emotionally immature, or professionally unsuccessful because her own security didn't depend on finding a partner who could contribute to household expenses or provide reliable health insurance coverage. The freedom to make romantic choices based purely on personal attraction and emotional connection was actually a luxury that was being subsidized by someone else's financial responsibility. But this reality was invisible to everyone in our family, including Morgan herself. She genuinely believed that her approach to relationships was more authentic and emotionally honest than mine, without recognizing that her ability to prioritize authenticity over practicality was only possible because someone else was handling the practical necessities of adult life. The same pattern was evident in how our family discussed our respective approaches to career development and professional goals. My focus on building expertise in a specific industry, maintaining stable employment, and pursuing advancement opportunities was viewed as evidence of my business-minded personality and natural inclination toward career success. The narrative suggested that professional achievement came naturally to me because I enjoyed analytical work and was comfortable with competitive environments. Morgan's more exploratory approach to career development, changing jobs frequently, exploring different industries, prioritizing personal fulfillment over financial advancement, was viewed as evidence of her creative nature and authentic approach to finding meaningful work. The family narrative suggested that Morgan was taking a more thoughtful and self-aware approach to career development by refusing to settle for work that didn't align with her values and interests. But again, this interpretation ignored the very different financial contexts that shaped our respective career choices. I had to maintain stable employment with comprehensive benefits because other people's healthcare security depended on my professional situation. I couldn't afford to take career risks or explore alternative paths because my job provided not just my own financial security, but the foundation of our entire family's healthcare coverage. Morgan could afford to prioritize personal fulfillment and meaningful work because her basic security needs were being met through invisible support systems that didn't depend on her own career success. She could quit jobs that didn't satisfy her emotionally, turn down opportunities that seemed boring or limiting, and take time between positions to figure out what she really wanted, because her healthcare coverage and basic living expenses were secured through arrangements she didn't understand or acknowledge. The luxury of making career choices based on personal fulfillment rather than financial necessity was actually an extraordinary privilege that most adults couldn't afford. But it was being treated as if it were simply evidence of Morgan's authentic and thoughtful approach to professional development. Meanwhile, my more strategic and stability-focused career choices were being treated as if they were the obvious and unremarkable decisions that someone with my personality would naturally make. The most painful aspect of this dynamic was how it affected conversations about our respective contributions to family well-being and our obligations to support our parents as they aged. During Dad's recovery, several family members had praised Morgan's emotional availability and dedication to providing comfort and companionship during a difficult time. Her willingness to spend hours at the hospital, her emotional support during medical appointments, and her efforts to maintain family morale were viewed as evidence of her deep love and commitment to our parents. My contributions to managing Dad's medical care, coordinating insurance authorizations, researching treatment options, handling administrative complications, were acknowledged but not celebrated in the same way. The practical support I provided was viewed as an extension of my professional expertise and natural inclination toward problem solving, rather than as evidence of love and commitment comparable to Morgan's emotional support. But the emotional support that Morgan was able to provide was only possible because someone else was handling the practical and financial aspects of Dad's care. She could focus on being emotionally available and providing comfort because she didn't have to worry about whether procedures would be covered by insurance, whether medications would be affordable, or whether our family could manage the financial impact of Dad's medical needs. I couldn't provide the same level of emotional support because I was managing the complex practical realities that made everyone else's emotional availability possible. While Morgan was holding Dad's hand and reassuring him about his recovery, I was on the phone with insurance representatives, ensuring that his cardiac rehabilitation would be approved and covered. While Morgan was organizing social media updates and meal deliveries from friends, I was researching coverage options for expensive medications and coordinating with medical billing departments to prevent payment delays that could affect Dad's ongoing care. The division of labor wasn't necessarily unfair. Families often function best when different members contribute different types of support during crises. But the way our respective contributions were valued and recognized reflected deeper assumptions about the relative importance of emotional versus practical support, and about which types of family contributions deserved praise and appreciation. More troubling was the assumption that my practical contributions were somehow less meaningful or emotionally significant than Morgan's more visible emotional support. The implication was that managing insurance authorizations and coordinating medical care was just technical work that I enjoyed doing, rather than expressions of love and commitment that required significant personal sacrifice and emotional investment. The reality was that every hour I spent researching Dad's coverage options or troubleshooting billing problems was an hour I couldn't spend providing emotional comfort or simply enjoying time with him during his recovery. Every evening I devoted to managing insurance paperwork was an evening I couldn't spend having relaxed family conversations or participating in the social activities that seemed to come so naturally to Morgan. But because my contributions were less visible and more technical in nature, they were often taken for granted or minimized in ways that Morgan's more emotionally expressive support never was. The assumption seemed to be that insurance management and medical coordination were simply extensions of my job responsibilities, rather than additional burdens I was taking on specifically to help my family during a difficult time. The differential recognition was particularly frustrating because my professional expertise in insurance was actually being used in highly personal and emotionally invested ways to protect my family's security and well-being. The knowledge I had developed about healthcare coverage wasn't just technical expertise. It was specialized knowledge that I was applying strategically to ensure that the people I loved most would have access to the best possible medical care without facing financial hardship. But this personal application of professional expertise was invisible to everyone in my family, including Morgan, who seemed to view my involvement in insurance matters as simply the natural result of my career choice, rather than as evidence of my commitment to family well-being. The sophisticated healthcare security system I had created to protect our family was treated as if it were a happy accident or a natural extension of my personality, rather than a deliberate and ongoing expression of love and responsibility. The invisibility of my contributions was creating a dynamic where Morgan received credit and appreciation for emotional support that was only possible because of practical support she didn't recognize or acknowledge. Meanwhile, I was providing crucial practical support that enabled everyone else's emotional availability, while receiving minimal recognition for the personal sacrifice and emotional investment that this support required. As Dad's recovery progressed and our family began planning for long-term adjustments to his health needs and career limitations, these patterns of recognition and appreciation were becoming increasingly relevant to how we would handle ongoing challenges and responsibilities. The assumption that I would naturally continue managing all practical and financial aspects of Dad's care, while Morgan continued providing emotional support and social coordination, was shaping everyone's expectations about how our family would function going forward. But these expectations were based on incomplete understanding of the actual costs and complexities involved in providing the practical support that everyone was taking for granted. The assumption that I would continue managing insurance coordination and medical administration indefinitely ignored the reality that this work required significant time, expertise, and emotional energy that I was providing without recognition or appreciation. More importantly, the assumption that our family's healthcare security would continue automatically ignored the reality that this security was dependent on my continued willingness and ability to provide it through my employment benefits and personal financial sacrifice. The practical support that was enabling Morgan's emotional availability and our parents' peace of mind during Dad's recovery was actually a complex and fragile arrangement that could disappear if circumstances changed or if I decided that the personal costs were no longer sustainable. The question was whether I was ready to make visible the practical contributions I had been providing invisibly, and whether I was prepared for the ways that revelation might change our family's understanding of who was actually responsible for the security and stability that everyone was taking for granted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.